Hello, so it's Ross from Britain's in History. I'll talk a bit more about Bede and what he reveals about English-Welsh relations, or English against British relations is more correct, which goes back hundreds and hundreds of years, 1,500 years, and you can really see the genesis of it in some of his writing. So talked about, just roughly, to give you some flavour of the things happening in these historical topics we're discussing. So you got the Pelagian heresy, where Morgan of Wales was promoting the original British type Christianity, as opposed to the Roman Church, which is coming in via Augustine, 597, trying to convert Angles and Jutes and bring that in as the form of power control church, which the Church of England eventually peeled off from. So I'm just going to jump in there to give I'm going to read this more or less straight from the book, which is King Arthur of Glamorgan and Gwent, Wilson and Blackett. Tends to get a bit of a dog whistle reaction from a lot of people as soon as they hear those names. But try and just relax, and we're talking about what Bede wrote more than what Wilson and Blackett wrote, okay? So what we have then is letters going back and forth, which Bede records between Pope Gregory and Augustine, and he preserves these. Bede records these conversations. So what you have is the British Church refusing to be subjected to a bishop sent from Rome, Augustine. So basically the Romans have sent this bishop. He lives with their enemies, the Angles, and then demands that the British bend the knee and follow him. And then I'm any of it. I think, who is this guy? He must be joking. Since when does the doctrines of the church say that one bishop has to bow the knee to another bishop? There'd been other synods and councils about this, and they'd all been given their autonomy or independence. So anyways, it's very much against what they wanted. So there's an abortive conference in 603 AD with Augustine's threat that unless the British submitted, they would be attacked by their enemies. So there's the good old Christian Saint Augustine threatening violence by the sword and war, as was the usual tactic. So if you like all future popes, Gregory's only concern was to bring as many churches under his control as possible, and to establish more so as to increase the revenues that Rome could bleed from other countries and so gather wealth and power. And it gives the other example there of throughout Europe, there's other, what they might call First Crusades, really, going around, there we are, Charlemagne, for example, going around Christianizing with the point of the sword. So that's the way it was done. So the First Crusades really were against the Gauls and the British. So there we go. So people talk about the Crusades, just remember who got it first. And it's still going on, you could argue. Anyway, trying to keep politics out of this. So what had happened over 300 years or so, the church in Rome had redefined or remodeled certain aspects of the Christian belief. Over in Britain, which had been virtually isolated since about 300 AD, the British church had just gone along with the same old belief and practice which they had originally been taught in the 1st century. The Scots in the north of Britain and the Welsh both continued in the same ways, with the Scots having been converted by the Welsh. A bit of cheeky comment again, which winds people up, but it says here, it's in fact difficult to understand how a belief which is stated to be founded on a gospel of absolute truth and fact can or should be modified or redefined. So anyway, after the failed conference of 603 AD, the promise or threat of Augustine, who can hardly be called Christian at all, was fulfilled. When at the Battle of Chester in 614 AD, no less than 1,250 British monks were slaughtered. Incredibly, the action was applauded by the pious Bede, because they were teaching the wrong type of Christianity, so they should kill them all. It's that kind of tolerance and discussion, Anyway, so in 604 Augustine died. Then he moved on to Laurentius, and it also goes through a lot of the Saxon kings then, because it all started to backfire really on the Roman Church, because the Angles and that started turning away again. So in 619 Ethelbert of Kent died. His successor Eadbald rejected Christianity, as did the heirs of King Cybert of the East Saxons. Both Bishop Mellitus of London and Justus of Rochester fled to Gaul, whilst Laurentius stayed on to convert King Eadbald and then to recall Melitius and Justus. So when Laurentius died in 624, Mellitus became the third Archbishop of Canterbury. So then, as I wrap it up, it's not really worth another whole video, but it's a little add-on, because Bede moves on, talking about the conversion of King Edward Northumbrian, and going through different people. I'm sure people are aware of this. But anyway, the point I'm trying to get on this particular video is this divide between the two churches. And the great divide between the Roman Church planted in England and the British Church remained. In Northumbria itself, the Synod at Whitby in 664 decided the issue that the church there would follow Roman practice, primarily because the Romans argued that they derived their authority from St. Peter, who held the keys of heaven, and was upon which the church was founded by Christ. Nothing to do with logic or doctrine or anything like that. It was just, we've got the keys, we're in charge, okay? Which, by the way, and he's looking at the new book, Where Jesus is Buried, by Wilson and Blackett, whether or not Peter even went to Rome is in dispute. So, anyway, there's a further synod in 670 at Hertford, and then you see that it becomes an English thing rather than a British thing, because you've got the representatives from East Anglia, Northumbria, Kent, Wessex, and Mercia, with Archbishop Theodore of Canterbury organising the event. There's a life of St. Hilda, and the works end in 751 AD, with a note on the state of affairs in Britain. Just to summarise, the work is a remarkable history of events in Britain in the 7th century, but unfortunately it adds very little to the detail which we need to seek Arthur. What it does, however, is to accurately date huge numbers of events and people who helped to create the framework from which we can work back to the time of King Arthur. So this is the point why reading these are the sources before we get on to the analysis, okay? Just want to show to people that these ideas have not come from nowhere. They were the accepted history for a long, long time. It's only recently everything's Arthur has been shoved into the myth category. I'm going to unshove it, right, to use a new word. So historically, it's a document of incalculable value to all in Britain, collected, analysed and written under what must have been conditions of great difficulty, making sense of many of the short cryptic entries in the Welsh and Saxon annals. Unfortunately, Bede reveals an unmistakable bias against the British in his work, possibly as a result of the independence of the British Church, viewed by the Roman Catholics as heresy. Possibly it was just simple racial discrimination. So there we are. So we're going to go on then to talk about later historians and what they say about British history and how that helps us put the overall picture together. And then once we got all these blocks, all our bricks in a row, we start building on it, and then we can start talking about whether you like the building, eh? So well done, Chucks. They stayed very quiet. I have to have bribed them with more food. The sun's moved behind this tree, so I'm looking a bit shadowy and camouflage. I quite like that look. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave your comments, and I hope you see this is trying to build a more academic approach, and there's no need to fall out over it, okay? You can disagree, no problem. Anyway, till the next time, enjoy the sun. It's beautiful weather in South Wales. From me, Heddwch.